Alright, time to get into part 2 of Post-Justice League 5, with the year 2044 with conflicting heroes. The first being Sea Devils. A team of underwater adventurers try to find a famous artifact that went down with a ship lost to history. This would be very different from other DCEU films going on at the time. It would be more along the lines of a modern Indiana Jones or National Treasure than anything else. It wouldn't exactly be anything special, but it would be a fun deterrent for people who don't like extreme superhero stuff. It would be directed by Breck Eisner and written by Jim Koof, or Koof, or however the fuck you pronounce it. The next film is Firestorm. The original Killer Frost, Crystal Frost, is killed in a battle after absorbing too much heat/power from Firestorm. When her friend, Dr. Louise Lincoln, learns of this, she decides to repeat the experiment that turned Crystal into her villainous counterpart, to get revenge on Firestorm, as well as avenge her fallen friend. Somewhat similar to Static, it would also follow the ins and outs of being a younger hero, especially with having extreme nuclear powers that might be more sensitive and harder to control. It would be written and directed by Seth Grahame-Smith. Next is Zoriel the Fallen Angel. Zoriel was a guardian angel until he fell in love with a human and he was cast out of heaven for trying to be with her, as well as learning the plans of a second rebellion against God. He is now doomed to walk the earth as a mortal while the leader of the planned rebellion, Asmodel, and his forces try to hunt him down and kill him. It would take place on the same earth as Hellblazer and the Books of Magic. The showrunner would be Tom Capanos. Next up is Injustice 2: Gods Against Us. Following the events of the previous show, it follows all the characters on the Earth after the tyrannical Superman's fall, leading up to the invasion of Brainiac / the events of the game. The showrunner would be Aaron Guzikowski. Next up is 2045 with more strange heroes. The first being Tommy Tomorrow, the cosmic adventures of Tommy Tomorrow across the universe. This would be one of those cases where it would be Warner Brothers trying to catch lightning in a bottle twice. Trying to get the attention of Adam Strange again, they used Tommy Tomorrow instead. That's how I envisioned something like this existing. It would be written and directed by Joss Whedon. Wink wink. The next film would be The Deranged Life of Erwin Schwab. The film follows Erwin Schwab, a man who thinks reality around him is a delusion, might think he's a hero or villain or something. He is unsure, but he goes by the name Ambush Bug, never takes off his costume, and is just going around doing whatever he feels like it. If I could compare this to anything, it would be like Deadpool on crack. Ambush Bug is just one of those characters that makes absolutely no sense, but is really awesome despite this. Sometimes he's a hero, sometimes he's a villain. He's just a weird character that is never used in the DC universe. I think it would be interesting to have as a movie because of how off the wall he is. I also think it would be funny to have him cameo in other movies like his modern role in the comics, like the Pizza Planet truck, but for DC movies. His origin would never be explained until a post-credit scene that shows it. The main quote-unquote villain would be Johnny DC, who is a continuity cop trying to maintain the DC universe canon. The movie would be written and directed by Ari Aster. Finally, for 2045 is Metal Men. Dr. Will Magnus makes a group of sentient shape-shifting robots to save the world from various disasters. The first season would be episodic, while the next few seasons would follow a main villain. Each season would follow a different robot as the protagonist, rather than Will Magnus being the protagonist like he usually is. It would be a balanced tone of silly and serious. It wouldn't go too much into either direction. I wouldn't even call it a dark comedy because the comedy would be kind of cute and silly, but just have more dramatic moments. But again, it wouldn't go too far into either direction, as I said, so it doesn't come off as tonally inconsistent. The showrunner would be Brad Wright. Next up is 2046 with Darker Heroes. The first being Justice League Dark 3. The team, which now includes Blue Devil, fights the villainous Hecate. It's as simple as that, and it's going to be their toughest villain yet, because of course it is. The movie would once again be written and directed by Joseph Kahn. Next up is Vigilante. While initially Adrian Chase goes on a path for revenge against the people who killed his family, he finds himself becoming more and more distant from his moral code, and he wonders if he can truly stop the path of destruction he's caused. Vigilante is pretty much a ripoff of The Punisher, but since no Punisher movie really worked, I decided to make this one more of a character study and more so about the morale of the character. It is straight out of the comics, so it's not totally out there for the character. It would be written and directed by Jonathan Hensley. Then finally, for 2046, is Superman's Secret Identity, a 4-part adaptation of the comic of the same name. That's it. The showrunner would be Matthew Vaughn. Next up is 2047 with conflicting heroes. The first being The Creeper. Jack Ryder becomes the Creeper after almost dying from a stab wound with the help of Dr. Yatz. He eventually battles the villain Proteus, who swears vengeance upon the world after being so poor for so long. Jack and Creeper would be showcased as a split personality, and Jack would think he and Creeper are two separate people, and vice versa. It would be written and directed by Jonathan Liebesman. Next is Inferior 5. A group of legacy heroes have lackluster abilities, and they try to save the world despite their incompetence. Similar to Hellblazer, this would take place on a separate world from the main DC continuity. It would be more along the lines of an adult comedy movie, nothing too gross and graphic, but it's not exactly going to be for children either. It would be written and directed by Judd Apatow. Then finally, for 2047, we have Batman the Caped Crusader. This would be an adaptation of the two Batman Telltale games, Batman and Batman the Enemy Within. The showrunner would be David A. Kelly. Yes, I'm aware he didn't do that great with the last superhero show he worked on, but I think this would work more so. Next is 2048 with Elseworld stories, with the first being Batman Master of the Future. It would be an adaptation of the sequel to Gotham by Gaslight, as well as obviously being a sequel to the film. It would be written and directed by Jennifer Kent. Then it would be the Trenchcoat Brigade, an adaptation of the miniseries of the same name, set in the same universe as Hellblazer, Books of Magic, and Zoriel. The showrunner would be Daniel Cerrone. Next up is 2049 with Human Heroes, the first being Thomas Blake, Catman. The deconstruction of a villain who has never been taken seriously, and it takes a toll on his mental health, as well as being a villain in the first place after losing his fortune. Catman has always been someone that has been the butt of the joke for years, even using the name to parody Adam West's Batman on The Fairly OddParents. But with this movie, it uses that sort of idea to make the character seem more human. Firstly, he became a petty thief because he lost all his money and was bored. He then became a very Silver Age villain with a burglary that was always surrounded by the theme of cats. It then became a point where Batman didn't even bother fighting him anymore and either sent Robin after him and then eventually only fought nobody heroes. He became pathetic and a shell of his former self. He questions everything in his life and that led him to this point and has a nervous breakdown. It would sort of have Blake coming into terms with that and dealing with that. By the end, I would imagine he would become an anti-hero, being inspired by another cat-themed anti-hero, Catwoman. It would be written by Scott Kozar and directed by Brad Anderson. Next is Kid Eternity. This show would be based around a kid who died 75 years too early when a U-boat killed him and his grandpa while in a fishing boat during World War II. However, he is soon brought back to life with newfound abilities but cannot remember his life beforehand and only goes by Kid, as that is the closest thing he can remember to his name. He now has the power to summon historical figures and fictional characters by saying the word eternity, as well as possessing the ability to time travel, but with certain limits and intangibility. He is joined in his journey by Mr. Keeper, who made the error in the first place. He would travel from place to place doing good deeds with his powers. Now, I'm going to be using the original Quality Comics origin, as I feel the modern rendition of the character and his revised origin is really stupid and overly dark and edgy when it didn't need to be. It's definitely a product of the 90s. But moving back to the show, I thought this would be a really inventive idea and sort of a resurrection man for kids in a way. The showrunner is Carlton Cuse. Next up is Elseworld stories, with the first being Freedom Fighters, a group of rebels that include Phantom Lady, Black Condor, Dollman, Human Bomb, The Ray, and Uncle Sam try to stop the tyrannical government from controlling America in an alternate world where the Nazis won World War II. This would be simple enough. It's kind of like Man in the High Castle, but it's obviously a bit more action-oriented and, a movie. The main villain wouldn't exactly be anyone specific except for maybe Hitler and his son. I would envision this would take place in the 60s or 70s. It would be written and directed by Jon Favreau. Next is Night Force. So this would kind of be like Justice League Dark, but not incredibly. This would involve a team of people going after supernatural threats, but they would all be human fighting supernatural threats. So it's definitely a lot more grounded than JLD, and I think because of that would appeal to more people, which is what the intent was when Marv Wolfman and Gene Colan created it. Think Night Stalkers, but human instead of vampires. It would involve a sorcerer named Baron Winters selecting an elite team of people aware of the supernatural who are willing and capable of fighting the threat. The initial team would involve Vanessa Van Helsing, Jack Gold, Donovan Kane, and Zadok Grimm. However, they might leave, die, or come back later on. It would be a very loose group that would be different at the end of the season than from where it began. The first season would involve them fighting Deacon Blackfire and his evil cult. The second season would be the villain Neron, although very different from his Legends counterpart. The third season would be Count Dracula, and the final season would be the devil himself. The showrunner would be John Logan. Next up is 2051 with Cosmic Heroes. The first being Wave Rider. So this one is kind of cool. It involves a guy named Matthew Ryder who lives in a post-apocalyptic future who wants to fight back against the villain Monarch, and because of this, involves himself in a time travel experiment that manages to merge him with the time stream. It's because of this that he gains numerous powers, one of which is going backwards and forwards in time. However, he has no control where he'll end up, so while trying to defeat the dictator Monarch, he keeps going to various times across human history to try and find Monarch and defeat him before he rises to power. This is pretty much the first season of Legends of Tomorrow, which ripped off a lot of his backstory and whatnot, but I still think this could work as a movie. It would kind of be similar to the very early serials of Doctor Who, where the Doctor has no power of where he would end up. It would kind of be like that here, but he wouldn't be stuck in one location for very long, and each time he goes somewhere, he gains some information about Monarch. Obviously, Hawk and Dove are involved, since Monarch is the future version of Hawk, even though that wasn't the original intention of the original comic, but whatever. It would be written by John Gattens and directed by Dean Israelite. Next is The Misadventures of Space Cabbie. This would be a comedy show revolving around the eponymous Space Cabbie, taking various types of people all across the galaxy and being embroiled in their situations. Imagine a comedy version of the movie Collateral and as a TV show. It would be a very simple concept and be more along the lines of a simple network TV series that could air on like CBS or NBC. The showrunner would be Michael Schur. Then for 2052 is Elseworld stories, the first being Superman Distant Fires. This would be an adaptation of the Elseworld story of the same name. The main reason I wanted to use this one as one of the final stories was because it has a sense of finality to it before, well, the actual end of the DCEU. I just wanted one of the final stories to actually be final without it being final, if that makes sense. It would be written and directed by Matt Reeves. Then we have The Superheroes Epilogue. This would be a 16-episode miniseries that showcases the lives of every hero in the DCEU before the final film. From all the bigger heroes to the smaller heroes, everyone would be showcased one final time before the real end. The showrunner would be Brad Bird. To give you a framework though, here is how the episodes would be structured so you have an idea of who will be in the limited series and in what episode. Then we are at 2043, which is the end, with 1 million. So, for the final film in the DCEU, I was unsure what story to do. I initially intended to do Crisis on Infinite Earths, as that was a big, huge ending. But the thing with that is that it also promised a new beginning, which I don't necessarily want to do. I was racking my brain, trying to figure out what the best closer would be for everything, and I think I found the perfect ending. DC 1 million. Because it would provide an end for the modern era, but also showcasing what the future of the DC universe could hold one day. Even though the title technically references the 1 millionth comic that could exist, I found it to be a better title than 853 or 85,250 or something like that. Maybe it could be the millionth movie or something like that. Just don't do the math. So this would be an adaptation of the Grant Morrison miniseries from 1998, the same year Superman Distant Fires came out. Interesting. Speaking of though, while that would be a more tragic ending, this one is the complete opposite. It would be very hopeful as it shows the legacy of a lot of these heroes existing until the 853rd century. It's simply the story of the modern heroes and the 853rd heroes teaming up to stop Vandal Savage and Solaris, an evil artificial son who became good, then becomes evil again. It would be written and directed by Brad Bird, or possibly another writer-director if I can think of a better one. So, that's it. This is my entire vision of the DCEU. A 42-year-long expedition of ups, downs, and incredible storytelling. For better or for worse. This is what it could be, although nothing on this level, as I have the power of having no budget, hindsight, and having no complications whatsoever if Warner Brothers cared or people could work on one singular type of vision. It could be great, but now, all we can do is dream. Link for the wiki in the description. However, before the video ends, don't fret, I have 2 more DCEU project videos coming out. It's the casting, Even though it's incredibly unrealistic, yes, I'm going to still do the casting. Anyway, so stay tuned for that. But the next video is going to be my Doctor Who ranked for the 12th Doctor. That might be a little delayed because I'm still kind of finishing up the last season. So that might be a tiny bit delayed. But in between this video and that video, I might do a video on the last season of Dickinson, maybe to get those sweet views. Hey, I can be a greedy asshole too. So outside of that, nothing else to really state, but stay tuned for the next video, whatever that may be. Also, yes, I am aware I said 2043 instead of 2053. My bad.